Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki ki ahau. Tihei mauri ora, e nā mana e nā reo, e nā kārangatanga maha, koutou kua meni mai nei i nā tōpitu o te whenua, i nā tōpitu o te ao, nau mai, haere mai, tauti mai rā. Nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui, he hui nui, he hui whakahira mō tātou katoa. E te mana whenua o tēnei takiwā nai tua hereri, nei te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Ko waio, ko nukumania te maunga, ko ora kaya te awa, ko Naitahu me Katima Moi me Waitaha oku iwi, ko Liz Brown tuku noa, te tia mana o te Roputuia. Nei te mihi ki a koutou katoa. I'll turn now to my other co-chair, Peter. Kia ora.
No e rāni aku te puna, no te umuka aho, ko Peter Scott aho, kai Keratown tuku kaianga NINA, hi kai mahi pamu, I ti aku ao. Ki ngā taha o opihi, nāna ahau e whangai, ko ngā reki o oraki, ki te tarawha o oraki, ki te mihi nui no waiora o Waitaki o Rangitata. So just acknowledging where I come from, South Canterbury, the fact that I'm a farmer, I live alongside a river. It has sustained me, and I live in the shadow of Aoraki, on the hills of Aoraki, and acknowledging our two rivers, the Rangitata and the Waitaki.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Koitsburg te maunga, ko Main te awa, no Schweinfurt tia mana aho. Kete no ki o Otatahi and Naiane, ko Stephanie Ricksecker aho. My name's Stephanie Ricksecker, and I'm have the great privilege to be here with Peter and Liz today. I'm the Chief Executive for the Canterbury Regional Council, also known as Environment Canterbury. And in my pepeha, what you heard is that I'm not from here. And from the accent, you can tell I'm not from here. But the pepeha and the accent don't match. So my place and my river are Koitsburg is my maunga, and my mountain and mine, which I was blessed with when I was born, is in Schweinfurt, Germany. So yeah, I've traveled around the world, and I grew up in Canada and the United States. And in that context, I have the great privilege of being able to work across cultures and think about partnership. And that is what today is about. It's the messy reality of working in partnership. We will actually be able to put the microphone around, and I'm going to be emceeing and looking for questions. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Liz and Peter to tell our story, our narrative of how we got here, what partnership means, what it looks like, and the messy realities of it. You will see some images behind us. Those images are of this beautiful region called Waitaha, Canterbury, and it is for what and for whom we are responsible together. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Liz, who will speak next. To you, Liz.
Oh, kia ora anō, and probably I shouldn't have assumed that everybody understands te reo and you actually knew who I was or how I introduced myself. So just to give you a quick translation, my name's Liz Brown. I'm chair of one of the 18 papatipu runanga within the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā, and I co-chair Te Roputuia. Te Roputuia encompasses 10 of our papatipu runanga who are in the Waitaha, the Canterbury region. And so we're here, I'm here speaking on behalf of that collective, so that maybe gives you a little bit more context to whom I am. Just to recap the pitch, we're here to talk about how to respond to the changes that are facing our primary sector. We know that there's all these pressures that are coming on from all sorts of angles and different kaupapa that are coming towards us. And we're here to talk about what it looks like from our local perspective and how we've worked to address that and come together in partnership. We are really clear that this is one model, it's our model that we'll be presenting today, but it's also something for people to consider no matter where you come from, and whether you're from Aotearoa or not, it's an opportunity to think about, if you're from elsewhere, how do you engage with your Indigenous people for their voice to come forward as well. And so that's really what we're looking at, is giving you the whakapapa, the history of how Tūroputuia has come about. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Liz. I thought it might help if we just started with a bit of history and how we got to where we are, because that's a reasonably interesting story. Regional councils were founded in 1990 and put together some 700 different entities across New Zealand into 16 regional councils. They're now some unitaries, which do both environmental and territorial authority work. But from the onset of our regional council, Environment Canterbury, which covers the area from the Clarence to the top of the Lindis, so it's the biggest area. We're the biggest regional council in the country. Massive land area, not a lot of people, 600 and something thousand people. But from the inception, there was no natural resource regional plan, so there's no other way to, there was no planning hierarchy on how to handle the use of natural resources in Canterbury, and that was done through a consenting process back to then. So from 1990, in fact, until 2012, we never had a land and water regional plan. And how we got to where we got to there was that in 2008, 2009, the mayors of Canterbury got together, or a few of them got together, and went to the Minister for the Environment and said, look, this stuff's not working here. We're getting this intensification of agriculture, which was occurring from about 95 through to about 2010. The Regional Council has lost an appetite to get this regional plan in place, and so there was a report done, and we had commissioners put in place. And the significance of that is that up until that point in time, Liz and I would have seen each other in court, because prior to 2010, that's the only place that the Runanga across Canterbury and Environment Canterbury met, was when they were in court over an issue. From the inception of 2010, when the commissioners were put in place, one of the requirements under the Act was that they had to have somebody who was a commissioner, at least one of the commissioners had to understand the tangata whenua values. And from that inception back in 2010 to 2023, talking to you here today, then that's been a massive journey for us to get to where we are. Canterbury, the commissioners put in place 10 zone committees across Canterbury, and each of those zone committees had a mana whenua representation on it, one or two people, and they got to do sub-regional planning process that looked at the allocation of water in those areas, the flows and rivers, the allocation of, if you like, nutrient discharges and those sorts of things. So that was at that inception period, and now we've got to where we are now. And the reason that we're at where we are now is because there's a National Policy Statement of Freshwater Management, which means that we have to then go back and look at what we've done under Te Mana o Te Wai, which means that we need to take into account the mana of the river. So that process that we're involved in, we're working with our 10 Papa Tipu Runanga on a river-by-river basis across Canterbury. We've got 54 rivers, 70,000 kilometres worth of rivers, so there's a lot of work ahead of us. But essentially that's the story of how we got to where we are now. And the bit that we're doing now is a joint design process on how we're going to do Te Mana o Te Wai. And I think that's enough from me, Stephanie.
So if we examine the relationship, any relationship takes a lot of work. And if anybody could raise their hand if they have the perfect relationship where it goes really smoothly and you don't have to negotiate and navigate complexities. I'm kind of blinded by the light, but I'm scanning and I can't see anybody with their hand up. So just like all relationships, this relationship has taken a lot of work, and developing trust has been a key part of the relationship to take it forward. That hasn't come about easily, and it's not, and even now, we haven't got a relationship where it's totally smooth, but neither should it be. And I think Tracy Hopapa said just at the end of her speech that it's better to be in the room than not be in the room. And so that has been what it's been like for us as well, as we've navigated the challenges of working in partnership with Environment Canterbury. Obviously, it's been a positive working relationship, or I wouldn't be standing here on the stage with Environment Canterbury today. But it has taken a lot of work, a lot of negotiation, because we're coming from potentially two different worldviews driven by different drivers. And so it's how you bring those together to shape something to take it forward. More recently, we've had some really key successes, and one of them, which we are really proud of, is finally getting our 2 Ngāi Tahu councillors onto Environment Canterbury. And that was a fairly challenging process as well, where this was our second time of taking it to Parliament, where we were trying to get our 2 elected members onto Environment Canterbury, thrown out in the first time, the first readings, and then Ngāi Tahu, you might have heard Lisa Tumahai talking on Monday. We're pragmatic and we take a long game, so we knew that we just had to keep on persevering, and eventually we hope for success. And again, 2 councillors was what we were able to live with, and so that's what we're working to now. We've also set up a number of layers within Environment Canterbury as well. So Peter talked about the water zones. We also have Te Pai Herenga, which is an advisory panel of our local experts who contribute as well. And so we have significant layers now where we're working together to share our knowledge and expertise, to come together to find a solution and to maximise the opportunities that are available to us. So it is very much a process of negotiation and navigating our way through. And so, again, it takes time, and it really, as I emphasised before, is about trust. It is about building up those relationships. It's also about still having challenging conversations. So not just accepting somebody's point of view, but seeking to understand where they're coming from, what perspective they bring to it. And it's through those conversations, and they can be fairly robust. Ngāi Tahu's not backwards at coming forward and actually challenging and saying we don't agree with that. But it's about doing it respectfully so that you both understand either side of the conversation, and then with that shared understanding, you can start to navigate the way forward.
I've got a whole lot of notes here about what we're doing, but I don't want to talk about that now. I want to talk about what Liz just spoke about, because I think the challenge that we have is that there is a lot of criticism with what we're doing about having Ngāi Tahu councillors. But when we looked at that process in terms of the benefits that we could get as a council, far outweighed anything that was a negative or possibly a negative. And in fact, we said to the select committee that this is the most pragmatic, judicious and financially stable decision that this council will make. Because as we discuss our business, the business of governing the natural resources across Canterbury, we have the opportunity to have that input in the room. We do not have to have a special consultation process. We can have that input, we can get that view, we can steer our way through our relationships. And it needs to be said that the 10 papatipu runanga across Canterbury are different in terms of how they react to each other, how they see their own rohi, and so that's an interesting process. I spend more time now thinking and trying to work on this to make sure that we get this right and bits don't fall off the side of it. And Liz and I have more engagement now than what we did this time last year. But that's the point. I think that's the point. I heard that person talk about the merino shoes, and he referred to any given Sunday, El Pacino, which is a great movie. And this is an inch at a time. We need to go forward an inch at a time. We're happy to stand up and take criticism on this, but we're very clear that this is about Canterbury. It's not about New Zealand, it's not about anyone else. We're actually really, really selfish on this in terms of our relationship with our Papatipu Runanga. It's about us. It is tough. Are we there yet? No. Are we through the door? I don't think. I think we might be on the doorstep. Door's open. It's our opportunity to step forward and see where we get to. And the interesting thing about this from my point of view is that I'm really keen on doing this from the point of view that I won't ever in my lifetime get to do anything like this again and to test something that I think that we need to test. So there's a lot of eyes on us in terms of where we're headed. So let's see how we go.
I think one of the things from this is it's really recognising that Aotearoa is based on a treaty relationship, and this partnership has allowed that to come to the fore, and it's the recognition that we're there together. We've got equal voices, it's mana to mana, and that's not something that has been available for us as tangata whenua previously, where we're at the table in the conversations and really able to add our mataranga to the conversations. And so it's really amping up the importance of Te Treaty and what that looks like from a partnership perspective. But I thought it would be interesting to hand over to Stephanie, who has to navigate the operational complexities and bring this to life as well.
Kia ora, Liz. Thank you very much. I mentioned before that it's a great privilege to be the Chief Executive of Environment Canterbury, and it certainly is. Environment Canterbury and Waitaha Canterbury is the largest region in Aotearoa, New Zealand. You've already heard Chair Scott talk about the kilometres of water that sits in the rivers, but there are also the hapua and clearly the ocean, which we're responsible for ultimately. And in terms of the context of partnership, there are a few comments that I would like to make. One is that why would you do this? You would do it because it's the right thing to do. It is the history of this place and is the history of its people. But if you need to be convinced by some other facts other than what's right to do and ethically and morally correct, can I cite a few things? Tracy Haupapa talked about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. That treaty is what binds this country together. It is also, when I am the chief executive of a regional government in Aotearoa, a treaty that constitutes the relationship I must have with tangata whenua. And we continue to invent how we will do that. Why are we inventing it? Because the past is not always the right direction for the future. And our past is checkered with quite a lot of hurt and anxiety and much change and disempowerment. So to be a chief executive of a regional government that must look to Te Tiriti is one reason. A second reason is because Ngāi Tahu have a Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act. And note that word, from a regional government, the perspective of an act. There is an act that I, as a chief executive of a regional government, must follow. There is Te Tiriti, the Constitution of Aotearoa, and then there is the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act. And in that Settlement Act is a word that is very important, rangatiratanga. And in that context, I must work with the 10 Papatipu within Waitaha, and please recognize that the boundaries of Canterbury were not created by the tangata whenua, they were created by the Crown, so I must work within those boundaries. But in terms of that treaty settlement, rangatiratanga is really important. And then I'll look to the third thing. The third thing that the Crown did when they settled with Ngāi Tahu and Ngāi Tahu settled with the Crown was something that I am told was more important than money. It was the importance of the apology. The apology from the Crown to Ngāi Tahu with regard to how they were treated and the way that the Te Tiriti was not recognized. And in doing that, that apology has a sentence. And in that a sentence is the phrase, "This is the dawn of a new era." And it is upon leaders like Dame Margaret Baisley and Ta Mark Solomon who led the way with regard to the Tuia relationship. And for 10 years now, we have been working on this. In terms of my responsibilities, it is about making sure these two amazing co-chairs can do the work of their people for their people. Peter Scott and the councillors around the table are elected members who represent the range of opinions and views across the Canterbury region of Waitaha. And Liz, you co-chair with your colleagues and chairs and the Runanga across Waitaha to bring those voices together. And it's not easy. It's not easy because every 3 years we have an election and these people change, and every few years we have an election over here. So as the chief executive, I have to hold a place of partnership. I have to be able to induct and take people in and through. And in that journey is the power of leadership for me, but importantly, making sure that those pieces I talked about and the relationship these amazing people have forged is carried through. It is messy. We don't always agree. Actually, that's a good thing because it's innovation that comes from different views. It's the way of working that is different. Lastly, I'd just like to highlight the importance of two worldviews. They don't need to be integrated. Each of these worldviews has its own constitution, its own way of working. What we need to do is find a way of working in parallel for the good of Te Taiao and the good of community. And I am the servant to do that for these good people and all those around the table. Liz, would you like me to go into question and answers at this point, or would you like to carry on?
Just as touch upon what you were talking about, Stephanie, because what you've just described of the two worldviews merging, blending, and maybe diversifying from time to time is a very Ngāi Tahu concept of hai moana, the braided rivers. And just to do a plug, 80% of the braided rivers sit within the Ngāi Tahu takiwā. So it's a really good metaphor for us of the two knowledges coming together. Sometimes they'll blend together, sometimes they need to separate as well. And so what I think you've also heard from Stephanie is it's great when somebody can stand up and tell our story of our treaty settlement without it always needing to be us promoting it and explaining it. And so I want to thank you for that, Stephanie, because not everybody knows the story well enough to be able to explain it in such a way. So, Peter.
Yeah, just one more thing. I think that we're about to daylight our next piece of planning, which is a joint design process between our planners and the Papatupu Runanga planners. So we're about to daylight that with public engagement. I think we might even start this week with some primary industry bodies. There's going to be some noise come out of that, and there's going to be some people that aren't happy with the approach that we're taking or where we're headed with this. But it is national direction that we must follow, and it is the right thing for us as far as we're concerned in Canterbury to do that. I have a lot of trouble when I go back to my community in South Canterbury explaining this stuff because you can't explain it over a beer at the pub. You know, you can't do that because there's a shutdown, immediate shutdown of this stuff. But the stuff that's the history that Stephanie ran through is the history that we need to be honest to. We need to pay attention to that to move forward. So that's all I want to say, Stephanie.
And everybody here, we have a lot of shared values. We care for our environment, we care for people, we're driven by the same things. Whilst Ngāi Tahu has a very long perspective and an intergeneral focus, our whakatauki is mō tātou a muaka uri a muriaki nei for us and for the generations that come after us. That's not unique just to Ngāi Tahu. Everybody here, probably in the room, wants to do the best for the environment, the best for their whānau, and the best for Aotearoa. So it's about how we come together with that shared focus within the mahi that we have ahead of us.
Ka pai. And Tracy Hopapa earlier said, one of the greatest challenges is staying at the table. But the power of influence remains by being at the table. And there is more that joins us than divides us. And so as we go into that, think about the fact that Tracy put a wero down for you, a challenge. It is not tomorrow that you begin to lead, it is today. And these two leaders have started that along with all of their colleagues because they have a team behind them. So in that context, what questions might you have? And I think there's a roving mic somewhere around. I'm being blinded by lights. Thank you, fantastic. Over here, I've got a question. Yes.
Kanui te mihi ki a koutou. Ko Suzanne Boss taku ingoa, hei rangahau ki AgriSearch Lincoln taku mahi. Ane hei whakateki nui o taku ao. Ma whero, ma pango ka oti te mahi. Now look, my name's Suzanne Boss, I'm from AgriSearch at Lincoln. I wanted to, and I just given a proverb that's been really important to me in a journey that I've had over the last 5 years in AgriSearch working with our Māori partners. And it's literally translates, it says, by red, by black, the work will be done. But it's about partnership. And we work a lot in the North Island, and so I often make a joke about it being a red and black, and it's Canterbury. But it's a really, really cool thing about getting all parts of an organisation or a people together to work together. What's really struck me this morning is this amazing partnership that you've demonstrated on the stage today. Excuse me. And you both mentioned how the journey started in court. What I'd like to hear from both of you is how you've learnt along that journey, and particularly to understand that other world view that you've been exposed to and how that's grown along the way, and how other people can go on their own journey.
Ka pai, thank you.
From my perspective, it's about having the conversations really early, and again, understanding the two perspectives to see if there is actually a solution or some way of resolving the issues that both sides might have. And so if I could encourage anything, it is about early conversations, not waiting until decisions have been made, but having that discussion so that you don't end up in that conflict. And so that would be my best advice to anybody, is start the conversation very, very early on in the piece of mahi that's going on.
Look, this, to me, you asked me 5-6 years ago whether I'd be doing this, I would, it's really challenges, it really challenges me doing this, but it's something we need to do. So what we've talked about and what we keep talking about is that we need to have honest and straightforward relationships. My counsellors have said to me, I've got a kahui, which is a few counsellors that advise me on me. What are you doing right? You need to pull your head in, or whatever they need to say to me. And one of the things they said to me was, you're the chairman of this council. You hold our mana, and therefore you need to talk directly to a mana-to-mana conversation. So I've taken that on board and will do that. So I'll take that responsibility for my position. It stretches me quite a bit, actually, especially when you're doing that, there's no support. There's no one's going to pick you up if you fall over. But the other thing that we've tried to do is, in our council chamber where we meet, is to say, look, this is a safe space for us. We can say the things we need to say to each other here, and we shouldn't take offence. You need to get this on the table, because if it's not on the table and you fester and you go away and don't talk about it, then that's not going to move anyone forward. I think Runanga are really good at doing that, Liz. I think my councillors are still a bit huffy around it, and we keep saying to them, you just need to say it. Just say it. Say what you're thinking, because that's what moves you forward. And in the land and water stuff that I've been involved in since 1996, when I was the chairman of an irrigation company, and putting a land and water plan in place, like, there's some stuff that I'll never agree with the people that are at the other end of the continuum. I'll never agree with them on it. I might have changed a wee bit since in my time, but if you talk about things, which is what Liz is saying, when you talk about it, you'll get to the middle. And there'll be some stuff that you have to leave there, but mostly you get some consensus. And when you get a consensus, then you have the opportunity to have a decent conversation with people about things. So that's just me. That's how I see it.
The other thing I think is being able to admit when you're wrong sometimes, and being brave enough to do that and to say, well, maybe I didn't have all the information that I needed, maybe I hadn't considered it enough, maybe I've been driven by speed rather than actually stopping and taking time to think this through. But in these conversations, fronting that and saying I got it wrong, because people respect people who can admit that you weren't right the first time round. And so, again, that's that really good communication. So I had Peter in my office at 8:45 yesterday, not my favourite time on a Monday morning, but nonetheless there was an issue that we needed to discuss. So if we can, kanohi ki kanohi, and then actually work through how are we going to communicate this out together, and that shared approach to it as well.
And the statutory responsibility under this, the things that we're talking about are ours. We hold that statutory responsibility. The joint design process and how we get to the end of that, we haven't actually manufactured what that will look like yet. But, you know, through Stephanie and our council, we know what our responsibility is. We know that we need to get this land and water plan done. We know that we have to have it done by December next year. Have to have it drafted by December next year. But the responsibility for that when it goes through the process will be ours. And if we get to do a joint sign-off on that, that'll be a good thing. But we hold that responsibility and we take that pretty seriously.
Thank you for your patai, and if I just chime in a little bit, it takes a village to do this. And I need to thank Dame Margaret and Ta Mark, because it started from leadership that said the past cannot continue, we must do this differently. I became chief executive about 3 years ago, and at that time, one of the rangatira at Arawhanua laid a wero for me, a challenge, which was you've had the tuia program for 10 years, and that tuia program is about uplifting the understanding and the knowledge of all the kaimahi, all the staff within Environment Canterbury, so that they can better be part of partnership, so they know their jobs, they know their roles. And that's things like learning te reo, it's like understanding te tiriti, it's doing noho marae, but it's not nearly enough. And so what the rangatira said to me is, when every single person in your organization is able to walk in two worlds like I have to, you'll have nailed it. And that is the challenge that we have before us. And will we be in court again? We may be, but we would like to think that this partnership and this korero and the way we work helps not just uplift Environment Canterbury, but all of us in a society to do the right thing with regard to te tiriti and partnership. Other questions? Yeah, wonderful. Here.
Thank you. Look, I'm in part here because I'm an Otago Regional Councillor, so I think I need to acknowledge that. And so thank you for the journey that you've gone on together. You've two really interesting questions for me. One is when you disagree, when you agree, it's not news. So when you do disagree, it becomes news. And how you do that in public, openly and transparently, but respectively, is really hard. And the second question I've got is, tuia is great for your staff, Stephanie, but I think Peter acknowledged that going back to the farm is hard. It's taking the whole community with you. And I don't think enough resources have been considered on how to take those bits of cave or those bits of those other parts of, Selwyn and on that journey in Canterbury or in Otago, in fact, in a large part of New Zealand, on what that journey is in a non-threatening way, and what we can all do as leaders on that. I think they're two questions.
On your last one, I just have to respond because I work in education. And so I see education of our nation being absolutely crucial. And I was a primary school teacher, and I always feel that that's the best place to start. My my previous partner, and you might understand why he's a previous partner, his grandfather said once, oh, you can tell she's got a bit of the tar brush in her because of her nose. And I always think, well, you know, sometimes you just have to park it with one generation where you're not going to be able to influence and make change. And so, but I do see the power of education being absolutely crucial for all of us within Aotearoa to understand the history for Māori, for iwi, but then our shared history together. And often some people have this sense of guilt. I don't believe in guilt. We're responsible for the actions that we take as individuals. We can acknowledge what's happened in the past, but we're responsible for the actions we take now. And so I think that's a really important thing to focus upon as well. And your first question around how do you do it in the media respectfully, from my perspective, it is acknowledging that we're not always going to have a shared perspective, but being respectful of the other party and acknowledging that we're coming from a different place. But I'll hand that one over.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the education thing. I've got a little 6-year-old grandson who opened the school assembly in Te Reo. That didn't come from me. It came from his willingness to learn the language and his ability to do that. So I think education is massive in where we get to, and you know that's great. That's part of me. I said, I feel like an educator again. You know, I feel like I'm actually trying to teach people stuff that they should already know, but our history hasn't been well recorded or well put across. The bit about where do we get to was your question. Where do you get when you have a problem or a difficulty? Well, we're quite lucky. We're extremely lucky. We've got 800 staff at ECAN, so massive filters go through that. I feel sorry for runanga who are a bit stretched sometimes, depending on which runanga they are in terms of their capacity to do that. But essentially, what we try and do is we try and work out why. Why is this an issue, and understand that. And there'll be some things that we can work our way through, and we've had a few issues like that on our plate over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So we're just still working our way through that. But the mana to mana thing is important for me to go up and talk to runanga chairs and say, look, where are we at with this? Can we work our way through this? We've got a huge amount of people that want to help, and they're not always helpful. They tend to try and do things that don't help, but we talk our way through it. That's what we do, and we've got good forums to do that. My 2 big filters that I use are here.
I'm not a big filter. Well, I hope not.
This person here and this person here. I've got a lot of people advising me on what I should and shouldn't say, but I think the relationship that we have is strong enough that I can pick the phone up with runanga chairs and say, look, this is what's going on. Where are we at with this? And then we just work our way through it. So there's never ever going to be a big hurdle there. It's just something that we can go around really or go over.
Yeah, ka pai. And if I can pick up the question or the comment with regard to working with our communities, we all have a responsibility for that. So absolutely, it's the uplift within Environment Canterbury, but it's also the fact that we have done this for a wee while. So the Canterbury Water Management Strategy has been in effect for over a decade. And while during that process, we had tangata whenua at the table, but not in the way we do now, not in true partnership. Rather, they were at the table and shared their views, but didn't hold the pen and didn't shape it right from the beginning, as Liz has said. But they've been part of this journey along, but so is our community. Our zone committees have been part of that. Now, can I be a bit poking the bear here? Because we're having a korero around this, right? Our nation is in need of a conversation around this. We are absolutely in need of that conversation. And every single one of you is a conduit for the korero a conduit for sharing the things we've spoken about here today, your own views, and the way that we can, under Te Tiriti, create a nation that is more united than separated. And when I think about being a regional government, we're doing the Kiuta Kitai plan, that from the mountains to the sea, it's an integrated plan. We will be engaging with our community. And part of that process is right here and right now. This is not scary. We're not the scary beast in partnership. Actually, what's scary is climate change, the impacts on our fresh water, the impacts on Mahinga Kai. And if we all want our children and our grandchildren and their children to have a better future, then we have to engage with that. And I'll take that, Wedo. I'll absolutely take it. And remember that it's not just in the building, it's outside the building. Ka pai.
Yeah, can I just add to that, because I think the issue that we have here is that New Zealand under the legislation that we have in front of us under National Policy Statement, Freshwater Management, is going to change, and it's going to change significantly. And I asked about, I don't know, 3 months ago to get the 10 things from our planners and consenting people, the 10 things that are going to affect Canterbury. I'm not going to go through them. They were reluctant to give them to me. But essentially, the GDP within Canterbury is going to change, and it's going to have to. Land use is going to have to change. The ability to be able to do the things that we're doing now, not all over Canterbury, but in some specific areas, is going to be challenged. And I spoke to the Minister about this, Minister Parker about this, and I said to him, Minister, I want to raise this with our communities because, it is of a concern. And he said, well, you should. That's exactly what you should be doing. You should be talking to those communities about that. So the process that we're in right at this point in time, it is a challenge, and it's a GDP challenge for us. This is not normal stuff that we're going to do, and I would tend to think that through this planning period, and I'm not going to put a time frame on that, the rest of the country's in the same process that we are. We're not the only ones doing this, that things are going to change, and it's great to see this conference discussing those things and what the future might look like, because we're living it right at this point in time. It's going to change.
Yes, another question, please.
Kia ora, Dan Cameron. I'm the Technical Specialist for Sustainability at Assure Quality. What's one thing specific to this relationship that you do regularly that makes it work?
Talk.
Make sure they get together.
I think when I say listen, from my point of view, is you need to listen for the right cues. There's a lot of information comes through, but when you speak, and they say when you speak to the head of the fish, then you get the direct conversation, and you don't miss out on that. And the other thing that I do anyway, from my point of view, and I'm sure that Liz can speak how she circles back with her chairs, but I'll speak about how I do that. I circle back with my council, and I certainly have a conversation during the week and weekly, and try and sign off with Chief Executive at the end of the week, so to make sure that we're not missing anything, we're on the same page. So that whole comms thing is really important, and that's counterintuitive to me. Like, I'm one of those people that doesn't, keeps the stuff inside me and don't want to get out of it, so I'm actually having to change the way I do things.
Yeah, I just support that. It's those conversations, and as I said, having them early rather than later.
Yeah, and if there's one thing that I would say, it's stay courageous. Other questions? Comments? One right up here at the front. Thank you.
You don't know how blinding it is up here. We can't really see you.
Tēnā tātou. My question is around, so I'm Chelsea, I'm from Mukatangata, I'm part of the Workforce Development Council. But my question is around Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So not talking to the Treaty of Waitangi, but specifically Te Tiriti o Waitangi. From both perspectives, what has been the most challenging part of kind of upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi from both sides?
I think from my side, having a semi-privileged education process, being from an agricultural background and understanding that the treaty was there and it was signed, but not ever having been challenged enough to actually make a commitment to that. And the thing that changed for me was we do treaty training at Environment Canterbury, so all staff go through a treaty training process that highlighted the systemic stuff that happened after the treaty was signed. But then the point, the really crucial point to me, or the watershed moment for me, was understanding the Settlement Act, the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act, and then looking at the apology which we now have in our council chamber. It was given to us by Papa Tipu Runanga. And then we've actually just put up a timeline. I showed Liz a photo of it, but a timeline about where we've gone, what our journey has been and where we are with each of the Runanga. And just that understanding. And then the pressure of being a chair of Environment Canterbury with the responsibility that I have. And I haven't had a come to Jesus moment here at all, but it's just been a gradual absorption, I guess, of what my responsibility is. And my responsibility is to ensure that we manage natural resources properly, and the most intense scrutiny of that, I guess, is from Runanga.
And in regard to Te Treaty o Waitangi, down here, our story around Te Treaty is quite different to elsewhere. And so if we think about that, because the South Island was claimed under a proclamation of discovery, because we didn't sign Te Treaty in the time frame. So the South Island was claimed prior to us ever putting a signature on Te Treaty. So our story, and so I think it's for people to understand the unique story of each iwi, no matter where you are, and in acknowledging that whilst iwi, there are some similarities, there are also differences as well, and we all have our own pūrākau, our own storying, etc. So for me, the Ngāi Tahu Act was pivotal in the relationship, because that actually was the acknowledgement of Ngāi Tahu as mana whenua, or mana I te whenua, so getting our mana from the land. And so I think for me, that was one of those really crucial moments. And as Stephanie talked about, that acknowledgement and that apology was truly significant. But also for us as Ngāi Tahu, we're now 25 years on potentially from our settlement. And that's one of the things that has allowed us to move from kind of grievance mode, because we've had the acknowledgement, we've had time to work through things, and now we're very much focused on how do we move forward and how do we move in a new direction, acknowledging the past, but now being firmly focused on the future.
We don't talk about Ngāi Tahu. We talk about our Papa Tipu Runanga, those 10 Runanga which are in, like our takiwā. They are the important thing, and if you talk to the people from Ngāi Tahu, they'll say, talk to the Runanga, because the devolution that they've got down to the Runanga is the big step change, I guess, in terms of where we've had. That's been going on for some time, but if we went to the kai whakahari of root Ngāi Tahu and said, look, we want to talk about it, Canterbury issue should go away.
Yeah, and if I can just elaborate on that, the big corporate Tront, and I'll say this publicly, I see as the tail that wags for us, the Papa Tipu Runanga. They were formed to actually deliver on our aspirations, and so that's what Peter's alluding to. And through that 20 years, 25 years, we're now moving to the mana sitting with the Papa Tipu Runanga, not with the corporate to the same degree. Corporate has their role and there are statutory requirements for the corporate, but it's allowing that local voice to come through, which this partnership has given us that opportunity as well. And I like to describe the Papa Tipu Runanga as technically like 10 little iwi, because we don't have a single Māori voice, a single Papatipu Runanga voice, we are all very unique, which is the challenge and the complexity for our partners to navigate through as well.
Yeah, and if I pick up that question with regard to Te Tiriti, as a chief executive for a regional government, I'm a creature of statute, and frankly, the statutes don't align. And so I'm often left having to make decisions that are counter to Te Tiriti in some form, because the statutes of, let's say, the RMA or the Local Government Act or the Biosecurity Act all have different definitions. And how do I reconcile these? And that's why partnership is so important, because I can honestly say, these don't reconcile, but as a creature of statute, I have to do this. But how do we work this through? Because there's an awful lot of gray space. And it's in the gray and in the robust kororo that we might find the solutions without always having to just change the law, although at times we would very much like to change the law. Other questions? Kia ora. Ka pai, have we got another one at the back there? Excellent. Yes, I'll never be able to see again after this bright light. Very good.
Tēnā tātou. Our friend here is getting some good exercise just before lunch, so I thought I'd give him a little sprint opportunity.
Kia tu pai.
E mihi ana kia koutou I whakamohio mai ki te meaninga o koutou kaupapa, tei atu ki ngā piki me ngā heke. Thank you all for sharing your kaupapa and your journey with those of us that have the opportunity to share in their journey with you. The question for you, if you don't mind, Violas, not only do you as the chair of the Papatipu Runaka have to navigate the relationship with the council, but I assume that given that you have 10 runaka that are all wanting a piece of you, or at least to have their voices heard, can you comment on how you balance or how you manage, particularly if there's 10 different opinions on a kaupapa that you might have to take back to them and then bring back to their council table?
Kia ora. And if I could see your face, then I might know who you are, and whether I was thinking I should have been able to see who was in the room, because I always feel nervous that I will have said something that somebody will later hold me to account for. But nonetheless, so what I had been doing previously, and we started this post-COVID, was we were having a Thursday, every fortnight, a Thursday catch-up of the Runaka chairs. We were doing it by Zoom, and so that was an opportunity for us to come together and just chew the fat about anything that we actually wanted to, even share gossip of what was happening at the Papatipu marae and how you were navigating that. That has dropped off a little bit recently, so now it's around trying to find the common place between the 10. And sometimes we're not always going to agree on anything. And so what we do sometimes is we're dividing things up, and Ngāi Tahu's always done this, where we talk about north of the Waitaki and south of the Waitaki. And so for some of the issues, the more Waitaki-focused Runaka are very much the people leading that space, and then others, so we kind of group across different kaupapa. So when it comes to coastal issues, those whom are more impacted by coastal issues, we will korero together. And so when it's braided rivers, gravel extraction, we bring together the runaka that are most impacted by it. And it's still a journey for us, but we come together every so often for wānanga, where we actually talk about not just trusting our partners, but needing to trust us as well. And I think that's something we're coming to more maturity over time. So allowing different runaka to lead in different spaces because they have the expertise in that space as well. So again, it's not an easy life having 10, and it is very much a process of, as I've talked about with our partners, even with our 10 runaka, of kōrero, negotiation, early conversations, circling back to check in, and then sometimes we're just going to have different opinions and we have to learn to live with that. So I don't know if I answered that enough for you.
Can I just acknowledge Liz, because I think she's got the hardest job of this partnership. Not me, I get paid for what I do. And I got 15 advisors and counsellors. I think the bit that we need to acknowledge in terms of the runanga involvement is not many of those people get paid for what they do, and this is a massive piece of work we're expecting them to do. And we don't expect them, and I certainly do not expect runanga across Canterbury to spend any treaty settlement money on doing something that should come to us. So resourcing is massive. There's a lot of weekend work there, Liz, that's done by runanga, and they're busy. You know, they're busy people in terms of what they're doing. She works harder than I do on her side of the partnership, and I can assure you of that.
Liz, could I just ask you perhaps to speak about the entities, because we have AEC and MKT and the like, and how those relate to our kaupapa as well?
Yep, so there are a number of environmental collectives that have been set up across the Papatipu Runanga. So Mahanui Kurataiao covers 6 of the Papatipu Runanga, and then we have AEC, which is 2. And then because our boundaries, or the Canterbury boundary doesn't line up with Papatipu boundaries, then we also go down into sort of the Otago entity as well. And then we have Kaikoura as well, further up the coast. And so they actually at the moment are a standalone. And so we have these additional complexities because there's not one single entity that represents the 10 as well. And so, yeah, that just adds to the complexity of how we have to work and navigate our way through it all.
And the beauty as Chief Executive for me is that those entities have the skill and the talent to be able to work with us in partnership where they provide advice and they provide guidance and they make decisions. And so together we make better decisions because of that, but also those are funded entities, and in the funding we then make sure that this kaupapa keeps growing in another way. So from my perspective, they're very powerful and important parts of our architecture, if you like. Have we got other questions in the house? We are on a countdown. I feel like something's going to happen, so, you know. Right, I can see the mic runner doing the job, Kapai, and we'll shift over here. There is a question. I see you, yes?
I wish I'd given you my Fitbit.
Yeah, Daryl Oldham, farmer from Mid-Canterbury. I commend what you're doing, and as a consent holder for irrigation water, I wonder, is there a partnership with current consent holders at the moment? I'm slightly concerned about what's coming for us. As an irrigator, I never set out to upset anybody. We were given a consent and allowed to, and I don't think I've flaunted the rules or done anything that we shouldn't have done. Yeah, where does that stand on current consent hold partnerships?
Thank you. Would either
Well,
of you like
I don't think you should have any great fear about what's coming, but it is a change in terms of what's coming. One of the things that we've talked about on a wider brief, I guess, is the fact that the economic activity in Canterbury is vitally important to runanga, just as it is to you. but it's a matter of like daylighting those conversations. Your consent process would have gone through an entity that would have looked at it from the Runanga's perspective and be granted. This isn't wholesale change as such, but in terms of where we've got high nitrate levels, like in Glenavian, we've got some down in the Hiako Plains, we're going to have to do something about that, because the requirement under NPS FM 2020 is to have 2.4 milligrams per litre of N in the water, and some of that stuff's at 13. Now, that's our responsibility to do something about that. We can't go, park us nuts, we're not going to do anything about that. We need to move towards doing that. And the process that I was talking about is that we need to take some time. We need to keep people informed of what we're trying to do, and we need to actually engage with them in a process that can move us in the right direction. So individual consent, I can't comment on those. I'm more than happy to talk to you outside of here if you want to, but yeah.
Just in terms of the statute, I need to keep my chair safe. He's not allowed to talk about consents. It's not his role, certainly mine. And then in terms of the Kiuta Kitai process, we're going out for the engagement. Central government has made it very clear through the Essential Freshwater Package that we are changing the way that we work. But I need to applaud Canterbury farming community. They've spent the last 10 years, 60 million of their own money, 60 million of ratepayers' dollars to create actually the strongest freshwater plans in the country. But we haven't got far enough, and we would like to work together on that. I'm conscious the ticker has gone down. I won't seek other questions. I'm going to just say 2 sentences, and then I will go to Liz to close us out. One sentence here is all about there is more that unites us than divides us. And the second comment that I'll make is one that a friend of mine shared with me just last week, and that is effectively your progress is defined by the speed of trust. Liz.
O nei te mihi ki a koutou katoa kui haere mai ki tēnei hui, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. And I thought I'd just finish with one whakatoki. He aha ki te kai a te rangatira, he korero, he korero, he korero. So we appreciate you coming here today to listen to us, to engage with us, and really the most important thing for leadership is to talk, and to talk. So if I can encourage anything, it is around having those conversations and having them early. Kia ora.
Kia ora.